Hi, welcome back to the Gem Hawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day. So last week I shared with you a tutorial from around about 2016 where we learnt how to put multiple sized and shaped cabochons into a single drop pendant, and I promised that I would follow that up with a tutorial showing you how you can fancy them up a little bit. Now, I don't know if you've seen my dedicated tutorials to wire weaving. They're pretty old now. They were done right back when I first started the channel in 2019. If you need to refer to them, I'll pop a link up above just so that you can see some examples of simple wire weaving. Now, it can be really whatever you fancy it to be. Basically, it is gathering together two or more pieces of wire with a pretty pattern of a finer gauge wire. So I have some examples to work with today, but as I say, you can always check back and look at the techniques involved if that's not something that you've done before. If you'd like to join me down at the board, we're going to have a look at the two pendants that we were looking at last week, and we're going to see how we can add some structural integrity and some decorative nature to them. So here's the piece that we actually made last week, and one of the pieces that I made in advance of the tutorial, just so you can see the same technique used in slightly different ways. And I've also got some lengths of wire weaving here. So this is a long and strong length of wire. The base wire is 1mm or 18 gauge, and there are two 18-inch lengths. And that has been wound together with some 0.4 or 26 gauge wire. And this has been wound 4 times around the one wire, twice around the both, and that just repeats all the way along. Another section I've got is just a short example section of a figure of 8 weave. Again, it's 1mm or 18 gauge wire, quite short lengths. They're only about 5 inches or so in length, just as an example. And they're held slightly apart, but they're continuously distant. So it's like working on tram tracks or rail tracks. They need to be kept the same distance apart as you go. So there's another small section of wire weaving. This one is an alternating weave, which I've got the right way up, which is nice. So it's 3 wraps around one side of the wire. Again, 1mm or 18 gauge round silver copper. I've tried to keep it as simple as possible. Wrapped 3 times around one side, once around both, 3 times around the opposite side. Now this is the only piece that I'm using today which has an up and a down. So on the front, you'll see that very regular design we just discussed. If you flip it over, you get a different feature where it passes twice around both and then 0 times around both. And you've still got those 3 wraps on alternating sides. They're both attractive wraps, but you need to decide which one you want to sort of focus on. To be fair, it's your design. If you want that to switch around halfway through, you do that. This is only around 8 to 9 inches in length, but these are the sorts of things that you can prepare whilst you're watching the telly. You might find if you're watching a very exciting programme that you might miss a beat. But anyway, I've prepared a couple of these just to add on to the designs that we were looking at. So I'm going to pop the one pendant up into the corner. And I think we might add some decor onto this one. Now, because last week I wanted to show you how to finish that bail up at the top, what I'm going to do here is just lift the 2 coils that we added so that they come away at 90 degrees to the design. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because A, I warmed the wire before I used it, so therefore it hasn't been structurally abused. It's quite soft and willing to do that. Secondly, I want to use this space to start attaching my accoutrement wire or my embellishing wire. So I think we're going to start with that section of, this is the 3 and then 3 on opposite sides. So what I'm going to do is lay an excess of maybe ½ an inch over the neck of the design. And what I'm going to do is bend that around the back. And then what you'll see is that starts to peek through with the bare wires. You can, if that comes a little bit too close to the front, just move that slightly and then adjust where those wires appear. So what I want to do is basically get that snuggled onto the design underneath where those 2 coils we created. So what I'm going to do here is take those wires and hide them away in the design. So my upper bare wire here, what we're doing is anchoring that extra piece of wire onto our design. So I'm going to take one of those wires, I'm just going to post it through the neck of the design where we created that bail, push that through, and then just hide the end away inside the design somewhere where it won't cause any issues. So what I'm going to do is just give that a squeeze and push it down inside the bail. So that is now no longer a problem. The other wire I'm going to take around, and underneath that little coil we made, I'm going to add an additional coil. So you've got different ways that you can add the section onto your pre-existing pendant. So that one I'm just going to push down. Please note I'm being very, very respectful of the gemstone cabochon. I'm not putting any pressure on it whatsoever. I'm abusing the wire. Then what I can do is just put that coil back into its position on the back. So that is now nice and strong and tidy. I'm going to leave the one on the front up for the time being. I haven't decided what I want to do with it. The key point is we've added a strong connection. So what I'm going to do is try and put a little bit of warmth into this woven section of wire. And then I'm going to start drawing it over the surface of the design. Now what you might want to do is just angle that slightly with your pliers, depending on how deep your cabochon is. I quite like that to sit around the outside edge. So I'm going to draw that around and then use my pliers just to strengthen a slight bend at the bottom. I'm going to draw that up. So I'm quite happy with how that sits around one side of the cabochon there. So I'm going to push that into position. And what I'm going to do is take the tail of the woven section, just move my tools out of the way, and I'm going to draw that around the neck that occurred between the two cabochons. So I'm going to wrap it as many times as makes me happy. I'm just going to fill the gap, I think. And then we've got a little bit of excess, which I think I'm going to take over to the other side. And again, depending on how deep your cab is, you may wish to just shape that slightly so that it domes as well. So I'm going to take that over the surface of the cabochon and draw that to wherever nature allows it to fall, because I've not measured this. I've just made some sections with whatever wire I had lying around. Now what's happened here is it's lifted slightly higher, so I'm going to very gently suggest that that goes down a bit. And what I think I'm going to do is take the lower of the two wires and attach it on the back of the pendant. The upper one I'm going to create a coil with and have that sit over the face of the pendant. So this is my upper wire. What you'll notice is I'm coiling the wire away from the surface of the pendant. There's nothing quite like getting close to completing a section and then gouging a great big scratch in your gemstone. It's not fun. It's very sad. Then when I move to my flat facing, in this instance bent chain nose pliers, I can move that a little bit closer to the cab if I need to, because they're much less likely to cause a problem. So I'm going to draw that coil up. As it happens, it sits quite nicely in the centre. As I say, this is not measured, it's just a section that I happen to have. So what I need to do now is get this tail at the back tucked away and draw it somehow to the design. So we're going to have a look for a way to do that. So the simplest thing you can do is coil that in a very, very tiny, just a single loop onto the framework. Now, as long as it doesn't cause any damage to your gemstone, that's absolutely fine. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do now. So I need that to come up quite sharply, and then we're going to trim away to probably around about just more than 1/4 of an inch. Take the tail and pop that away in the scrap pot. There's quite a nice gap here, so what I'm going to do is start by taking the end of that cut we've just made, and I'm going to start making very small movements and get that to slide inside the framework, being careful not to damage the cabochon itself. So you may need to slightly deform that framework just to post that tail through, and then just give that a bit of a squeeze, and it's joined together on the back there. So that's nice and secure. So you can play around with that a little bit if you need to. But that's basically how you can add accoutrements to it. I will show you now how to add a second length of wire weaving to your project. You can have as many or as few as you want. It depends on how it makes you feel when you see it. If it makes you happy, just stop. You don't have to keep on adding and layering. Sometimes less is definitely more. So I'm going to add one of the two sections that I created, and we'll have a look and see how that looks next. So with these designs, you can work out what appeals to you most. For me, it's genuinely about the gemstones. If symmetry appeals to you, then you'll probably want to work a way that will give you a symmetrical design. If that's not for you, then absolutely you can add your detail wherever you fancy. So I think probably what I would do with this is pre-shape some of the wire weaving that we've got here. And what you'll find is that something where there's a lot of wire will be much harder to bend, and it will want those two wires to slip one above the other. With a more open design, like the basket weave, you may find it's a little easier to get that to obey your desires. Another cool thing about basket weave is that you can kind of stretch it out a little bit. So if you want slightly more open appeal, you can just open that up slightly, careful it doesn't come off the end, and you get slightly more bang for your buck. That comes with practice, of course, so just go carefully to begin with and don't ruin all your hard work. So I'm just going to very, very gently, little by little, form a shape that makes me happy. And I think I might put that over the surface, have it crossing over, and see where we go from there. So I'm just going to try and replicate the form of that oval landscape oriented cabochon down at the bottom. So it's very small movements all the time. And we're going to have a look and see if that looks any good or not. If it doesn't, we can do something else. I quite like how that looks, but do you know what? I wonder what that would look like as a halo effect. So outside and round the back. I think I actually prefer that even. Not sure that we have quite enough though. So I'm going to sit that up and take a look. Yeah, I think I'm going to add that on in a slightly different fashion. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to weave using a 0.4mm gauge, a much finer gauge of wire than we worked on the cabochon setting. And I'm just going to tie that around the lower frame, which means I don't need these long extended sections on the back here. So I'm going to trim each of these to about 1/4 inch and turn them into loops. So this is genuinely on the fly. I've not measured anything. We're just kind of going with it, to be fair. And I'm going to turn these into small loops, coming inwards inside the frame that we've created, just so that they don't catch on anything. And these can sit behind the cabochon itself. What can happen, and the reason you hear the tool noises sometimes, is that the wire slips outside of the tools. As long as you don't damage yourself, it's really nothing to overly get concerned about. So I'm going to make sure that those are nice and flat to begin with. And then we're going to flip the design onto its back and just take a closer look. Yeah, I think that's going to look pretty cool actually. So I'm going to just now grab some 0.4mm gauge wire and start by tying the inside of the two lines of that figure of 8 weave to the framework of the original landscape oriented cabochon that we looked at. So I found myself a scrap length of 0.4, which is 26 gauge silver plated round copper wire, and I'm going to use that basically to sew that section of figure of 8 wire weaving onto the back of that base cabochon that we started with. So I'm going to start midpoint along my section of wire, which is about 12 inches long. And what I'm going to do is post one of the ends through down at the 6 o'clock position. I'm going to take that about halfway along. Now the reason I'm doing this is not for anything other than my convenience. What I want to do is find apertures on the frame wire to just draw this together where I can. So I'm going to take the tail of that 0.4 or 26 gauge wire and post it up inside the framework. Take that all the way around. I'm starting halfway along my finer gauge wire and halfway along that strand of woven section. There is no reason other than convenience to start at that position. So we're just going to make sure that we're happy with the shape and the form. I need to open that just ever so slightly. and make sure that it is indeed symmetrical if that is your thing. And all I'm going to do now is find points where I can tie these two segments of design together. So there's another hole on the woven section. Take that tail of wire down the bottom, pull that nice and firm, and then we're going to come up again between the cab and the framework, and we're just going to sew it on as if you were doing some mending. I'm not a seamstress at all, ever, can't create clothing, but I am a bit of a mender. So literally just sewing those things together. I'm going to show you a couple more examples, and then hopefully if I can get one side done relatively quickly, I won't need to show you the second side, but I'll show you just how to finish off. So we're just looking probably either every one or every other one of the pattern repeats. If you want to go every one, it will give you a nicer finish. It will just take slightly longer. So this is just one of many ways that you can add detail to your simple multi-cab drop pendant that we made last week. So again, drawing those bits together as you go around. And the more times you sew that together, the more stable it will get. And in a second, I'm going to turn it over and show you what that looks like. It may not be for you, but I think it'll look pretty cool. So just pulling that nice and firmly. We're always sewing the inside of that tramline section of wire weaving to the frame wire. So I'm going to pop up between those two coils that are on the base there. And then I think we'll go down inside just there. Whoops. If your wire does snap, do not worry, because all you can do is continue in the opposite direction, draw the wire across at the top, and then find a way to just bring that all neatly together. So it's a little bit clustered down at the base, so what I'll do is I'll just pop through, like so, go up on the other side, gone through the loop, which is absolutely perfect. I've accidentally come up through the loop that we put on the face of the cabochon, which is great because it gives me an opportunity to sew that to the frame really firmly. And that was a happy accident, a la Bob Ross. So again, we're just finding places where we can sew the inner wire to the frame wire. You can support that circle. Hopefully you'll weaken the wire less. And we need to get that back down inside the frame. Whoops. Sometimes it can be tricky to find that aperture, but it is there because we made that gap around the cabochon in the first instance. So put the tail through, it'll find its way. You can make your end of your wire into a little curved needle if you need to. Depends how much excess you've got. If you've got very little, sometimes it pays to not overstress what you're working with. I'm going to come along to do another couple. I'm actually really happy that that broke because it means I can show you what to do in an emergency. So again, we're not sewing onto the extra section that we added before. We're sewing onto the framework that sits around the cabochon. So supporting that wire as you go and then pulling that through. Once you've gone all the way around to the end, what you can do is just tie off by wrapping 3 times around some of that frame wire. And then if you want to, you can take these little loops that we made and snuggle them away behind the gemstone. Always being careful of the gemstone so you don't scratch or crack it, like so. Let's just turn that loop a little bit more in. And then on the surface, you have the appearance of an extra track running around the outside. So I'm going to finish that off in a minute and then add it to a photo on the end so you can see what it looks like. So I hope you've enjoyed embellishing the multi-cabochon drop pendant that we made last week, and I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Don't forget to join me over on Facebook every other week for a Monday live. I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. I'm Gem Hawkes. Thanks for having me. Bye for now.